Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We actually have a good martini today. It's not fantastic, but it's still better than yesterday when we had no good news. We also have bad and crazy. And, Jim, let's dive right in here. Let's start with a smattering of polls that suggest that the Democrats might be getting a little bit ahead of themselves about the size of the blue wave this year. Might not quite be the tidal wave, but we'll see. Two different polls looking at the president's job approval, pretty much saying the same thing. A new one from Rasmussen out today shows that 46% approve, 52% disapprove. So he's underwater, but 46% is better than he has been for most of the first 2 years here. And that suggests that the base and some others might be rallying around him. Another one out yesterday from Reuters and Ipsos shows that it's 45 and 52. Also on the generic congressional vote, Reuters and Ipsos, new poll out, same part of the same poll yesterday. Democrats 41, Republicans 39. And by most calculations from those who crunch the numbers, the Democrats will need to do quite a bit better than that to actually take back the House, much less the Senate. So long way to go. A lot of advantages still for the Dems in terms of energy. You talked about the 9 out of 10 Dems showing up in Ohio 12 earlier in the week. So it's not like we've got a lot in our favor, but at least there's some encouraging signs out there.
There's enough noise in the system that you probably wouldn't want to look at the generic ballot numbers and say, oh, my goodness, it's going to be terrible for Republicans. Earlier in the week, we looked at the special election in Ohio and said, okay, look, there's indicators the Democratic base is going to be super duper fired up. And the question is whether the Republican base will the Trump voters who came out in 2016 come out and vote for Republican candidates when Trump is not on the ballot? And that still remains an open question. Having said that, you look at all of the ones this week that have come out indicating the kind of generic ballot number. You've got Reuters and it's Democrats by 2. There was actually a tie in the Maine governor's race between Moody and Mills. The IBD-TIPP, I believe that's Investors Business Daily, has a tied generic ballot. Economist YouGov, they have Democrats by 3. Rasmussen has Democrats by 4. Greg, do you remember the good old days when the Rasmussen was the favorite pollster of Republicans?
Right.
So you look at all this stuff, and those aren't unbelievable numbers. Then you look at the Senate races and how for a blue wave year, you're not necessarily we keep seeing the hype about Ted Cruz is in trouble, and you have yet to see any real polling that indicates that. Is it going to be a closer race than usual? Yeah, because, Democrats had a god-awful year in 2014 in Texas, just getting, their butt kicked up and down the ballot. So, yeah, not surprised that you're going to hear Beto O'Rourke go out and have a better, do better than the typical Democrat. The typical Democrat has done pretty badly in that state lately. So you add it all up, and there's potential there for Republicans to have not a terrible year. I don't think anybody should be sleeping over this. They should be walking around with the expectation that they've got a fairly strong wind in their face. Besides all the historical issues of the president's party usually losing ground in a midterm election, look, we have a president who, fairly or not, really antagonizes the dickens out of every, typical Democratic voter. So Democrats don't have to worry about get out the vote this time. They know their base is going to show up. The question is, will Republicans do the same? I think it's safe to say that the tax cuts did not have the huge political bonanza and rush of enthusiasm amongst the base. But it's kind of an interesting analysis going around saying that every issue that each party is embracing actually backfires for them. Democrats really thought that, we're going to defund ICE. We're going to, it's time to abolish ICE. And actually that does more to just generate excitement amongst Republicans. Every time they push for impeachment, this actually really drives they thought it was going to drive up the Democratic base. Actually, it turns out the Republican base tends to get more fired up about it. So in a very strange way, there's really very few messages that you can put out to fire up your base that simultaneously won't fire up the other people's base. There's a lot of argument about whether when Trump comes to a place like the special election in Pennsylvania a couple months ago, special election in Ohio, does he actually do more to drive up Democratic turnout than he does Republican turnout? So we will see how this shakes out. But, a little bit of polling indicators are looking pretty good for Republicans this week. And I think they really could use it after that bullet dodged in the Ohio special election.
So what you're saying, Jim, is you should never get specific in your campaign ad. You should just show your family and puppies and say you want a free and secure and prosperous America, right?
I think the single most safe message you could go with, Greg, would be, I believe that children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Let them see all the beauty they have inside. And I'd love to see somebody actually go and do that, do the old lyrics as a speech, and just see how long it takes until people recognize. Because that is the most generic campaign speech. Thank you, Whitney Houston, for giving us the cliches we needed when a candidate really doesn't know what else to say.
Yes, exactly. Just quickly on the last couple polls here, quite a disparity on the right track, wrong track. Investors Business Daily has it 50-48 in favor of the right track, but over at The Economist, it's plus 11 for the wrong track, and at Reuters and Ipsos, plus 18 for the wrong track. So we'll see what track we're on Election Day in November.
Terrorist strikes again in London.
Putin's nuclear ambitions are raising proliferation questions.
There's a new military strategy in the South China Sea.
Global events happening now mean the demand for national security professionals will spike over the next decade. America's security will depend on individuals highly trained in strategy, disruption management, and decision-making. The Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security prepares students for a world full of instability. Students in our state-of-the-art school, just 3 blocks from the White House, take courses in counterterrorism, U.S. nuclear weapons, Russian politics, and statecraft. Our graduates are well prepared for sought-after security positions in government and private sectors. Even more unique are the multi-full-ride scholarships provided by donors investing in future leaders. For more information, go to dmgs.org/radio. For a career in organizations like Marriott and Boeing, the CIA, or FBI, and a possible full-ride scholarship, go immediately to dmgs.org/radio. That's dmgs.org/radio.
All right, Jim, let's move to our bad martini now, and let's move over to Fox News. For those who listen to Laura Ingraham on the radio or watch her television show, you know that one of her hot-button issues is immigration. She talks about it a lot. Maybe not quite as often as Hannity talks about the Mueller investigation, but that would be pretty hard. But she talked about it the other night in response to comments from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We referenced them briefly in yesterday's Three Martini Lunch, where she talked about the upper middle class allegedly no longer existing, and back in the 90s, people had minivans, and they don't have those anymore. And Ingraham then pivoted on that point and suggested that people like Ocasio-Cortez and a lot of liberals don't want border laws to exist anymore. They don't want border enforcement. They just want people to be able to come in if they want to. And given the push for the abolition of ICE, there is a growing contingent who believe that as long as you're not a convicted felon, maybe you should be allowed in. We obviously don't agree with that laws need to be enforced. And during her rant on this, Ingraham made a lot of good points about how we need to end sanctuary cities, get rid of criminal aliens, have tougher laws at the border. Catch and release isn't working well. People overstaying visas aren't caught very well. But she started out by saying this, and she's getting a lot of heat for it, and she should be getting a lot of heat for it.
Nevertheless, she's kind of right in a general sense, because in some parts of the country, it does seem like the America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for, and most of us don't like. From Virginia to California, we see stark examples of how radically, in some ways, the country has changed. Now, much of this is related to both illegal and, in some cases, legal immigration that, of course, progressives love.
So, Jim, the good point she made came after that. So she starts this rant by saying that there's this horrible demographic shift and making it seem like if things are going wrong, it's because of who is coming into the country rather than what they believe. And so she's getting a lot of blowback about this being allegedly racist, which she tried to push back on last night. But the issue is that America is an idea. It doesn't matter what you look like. If you come here and you want to uphold what it is to be an American, which includes the rule of law, but also opportunity and the liberties that we cherish. That's what makes you an American, not your ethnic demography and so forth. And while she has tried to clean that up, she left a very ugly taste out there that a lot of people are going to seize on.
You know, Greg, let me begin this with a generous assessment. You don't find a lot of xenophobes who have adopted a daughter from Guatemala,
right?
Which is what Laura Ingraham did years ago. So I don't think you can simply dismiss it as, oh, she hates immigrants or something like that. And everything she's talking about is down the street and around the corner from viewpoints that I don't think are xenophobic or racist or hateful or anything like that. It's fair to ask what level of immigration is right for this country. It's fair to ask, are we assimilating immigrants the way we used to? Yes, we have always had this tradition of people coming here from overseas. Even when they went through Ellis Island, they'd go into a neighborhood that was full of other folks who had come from their native countries, and they might keep speaking their own native languages. You go to Little Italy, Chinatown, think of all these little ethnic neighborhoods in New York City. Yes, there was generally a process. You didn't come right off the boat and suddenly speak English perfectly and suddenly understand every American custom and suddenly blend in. It was a process. Now, I think part of that is the rest of us, we have to have a certain amount of patience for this process. We have to kind of recognize that it's going to take people time to fully acclimate. But we do believe in this concept, or at least we used to believe in this concept of a melting pot. When you melt, you lose a little bit of what makes you distinct and different from everything else. But also, you end up with something kind of blending into and permeating the greater American whole. It can become in all kinds of different forms. You can think of the Irish Americans gradually rising up through the ranks of kind of American society to the point you end up with an Irish American president of the United States in John Kennedy. Or you can think of all the different ways that contributed to American arts, contributed to American culture. I mean, it's kind of odd, Greg, for people to argue this is a country that hates people from, say, Latin America when we have a Taco Bell on every corner. Although some people would probably argue it doesn't really count as Latin American food. And in fact, please don't blame Latin America for what Taco Bell is. But this argument, like, we can take almost any holiday and almost any tradition from any other foreign culture in America. You know what we do, Greg? We turn it into an excuse to drink. Cinco de Mayo, St. Patrick's Day. Right? I'm doing this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but there is something unique and beautiful and wonderful. In the Midwest, you see much more Polish-American traditions, German traditions, Czech-American traditions. Up in Minnesota, it's not a coincidence they call their team name the Vikings, right? You have a lot of people from Scandinavia there, and they still make their lutefisk. And this is all something we always used to enjoy and cherish, but also part of that was like, yeah, you bring part of what you brought from the old country, but you also become part of the greater American whole, and you kind of balance it out. And yeah, with each successive generation that lives in America, they're probably going to have a more tenuous tie back to the old country because they're becoming Americans. And that kind of was the point of all this. And if Laura Ingraham wants to express concern about that, fine. There was never a vote for, hey, let's have effectively an open border and have 11 million illegal immigrants come into this country. Well, you might argue that we've, elected several successive presidents and several successive Congresses who didn't do so. And only recently did we actually elect people who, at least now are saying they take it more seriously. The problem is, and I get a little worried about this, how often we end up having these discussions. And in that discussion, they kind of, if it's not explicitly racist, if it's not explicitly xenophobic, well, the way it's worded, doesn't make that distinction clear enough, right? When you talk about these changing demographics, when she says most of us don't like it, who's she speaking for, Greg? It's kind of very unusual wording. It comes across as most of us who are native born don't like all these people coming in here and changing that. There's a challenge to conservatism. There's a challenge to the Republican Party. There's a challenge to all of us. We have a more diverse country than we did 30 years ago and 60 years ago and 90 years ago. Now, I think this is a good thing. There are some parts of America from 30 years ago and 60 years ago, 90 years ago that we're not so proud of, that really weren't such in keeping with the American traditions and the values we claim to uphold. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Now, the other big reason I became a conservative, and I thought most people became conservatives, is because we believe our ideas work for everybody. Anybody can thrive in the free market system. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what your heritage is. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. It doesn't matter what you look like. We've seen people from all around the world come to America, thrive, live the American dream because free market economics and the freedom to go out and, work hard. And if you play by the rules, you can thrive anywhere. This should work for everyone. Traditional social values, you can find this in any culture. Strong national defense, you see everybody of every hue, of every color, of every culture serving in our armed forces, right? This whole idea of whatever differences our cultures have, we all kind of work, when you come here, you buy into the idea. This probably would be bad anytime It's particularly bad. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Charlottesville protest, rally, riot, and vehicular homicide that went on. They're apparently planning another event this weekend in Washington, D.C. If you're in the area, you might want to not be down by D.C. And apparently, apparently they're going to have checkpoints in Charlottesville and all kinds of stuff like that. I don't like hearing voices on the right going into this direction because it sounds all too much like those people are coming here and they're a problem. We should be able to say, hey, our ideas work for everyone. Our philosophies work for everyone. And we should be able to get everybody who's coming here into those ideas and accept those policies and to say, hey, this is what built America. This is how we thrive. Because here's the thing. If you look at all of those groups as a menace, Greg, is it any surprise they tune you out and don't want to listen to you and vote against your preferred candidates?
Exactly. The division that's going on in so many different ways in politics right now is not only harmful, it's counterproductive because absolutely right. The principles of freedom, the principles of rule of law, the principles of opportunity should be exactly what we're proclaiming. And that's the great American story over the past century plus. All right, Jim, let's close the week off with a double-barreled crazy martini. One of these we've briefly touched on before, but it's actually happening today. Des Moines Register. Michael Avenatti has arrived in Iowa. After 3 canceled flights and a 700-mile road trip, the lawyer known for representing adult film actress Stormy Daniels in her case against Republican President Donald Trump is ready to put his stake in the ground in the first-in-the-nation caucus state. Quote, I'm exploring a run for the presidency of the United States, and I wanted to come to Iowa and listen to people and learn about some issues facing the citizens of Iowa and do my homework. Something tells me he's going to do most of the talking. Avenatti, who rose to prominence as an outspoken critic of the president, toured the Iowa State Fair. He's scheduled to speak to the Democratic Wingding fundraiser Friday night in Clear Lake. Guess who else is going to be there, Jim? The guy whose last name we can never remember, John Delaney, the congressman from Maryland, potential candidate, Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, and apparently entrepreneur Andrew Yang, who everyone knows. Also going on, Democratic politics. Interestingly, the Empire State, they've already had their federal primaries for House and Senate. They're having their state primaries next month, and that could create a congressional vacancy. And that's leading to this. New York Post. Actor Richard Gere's name is being floated as a potential candidate for Congress in the northern suburbs, the Post has learned. The current representative of the 18th Congressional District, Sean Patrick Maloney, is running in September's Democratic primary for state attorney general, and if he's successful, his House seat would be open. That's where Gere comes in. The 68-year-old activist who lives in Pound Ridge, Westchester, within the district, is being talked up in Democratic circles as a possible replacement for Maloney. Quote, Richard Gere's name is being whispered about among Democrats. We'll see what he's made of, according to the mayor of Middletown. So, Jim, it's pretty clear that neither party is very serious a lot of times when they're thinking who might be the best candidate to run.
First of all, for every sharp-eared listener who has heard us in the past refer to John Delaney as John Mulaney, and is that an in-joke, or are they deliberately saying he's saying the wrong name because they want to make fun of how obscure this candidate is? Greg, I'll speak on behalf of both of us. Yeah, absolutely. We totally intended to use the wrong name. We knew the right name all along, and we totally didn't misremember it. Trust us. On Avenatti, I wrote this whole section in the Jolt today because his argument of why he's running for president and this isn't just a joke and this isn't just a publicity stunt is because he thinks the Democratic Party needs a fighter. And everywhere he goes, people tell him the Democratic Party needs a fighter. And my sense is if you really believe both the party and the country as a whole and the President of the United States need a fighter, then you fundamentally misunderstand what the job of the President of the United States is. And it's very interesting how quickly I do this criticism in the context of Avenatti, and everybody seems to interpret this as a criticism of Trump. I'll let people draw their own conclusions, but I went through all the typical things that a president has to deal with in the course of a day. Waking up from that presidential daily briefing, which probably comes up with a long list of here are the people who are trying to kill Americans, all of the tough calls that need to be made, all the number of times the president has, no good options. And in fact, it's simply a question of what's the least bad option out of many bad options. And the recognition that almost any decision you make is going to cost men and women in uniform, and sometimes men and women not in uniform, their lives. you kind of have to make that decision and recognize at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to be writing the letters of condolence to the families. This is a serious job. This is not just cable news shout fest. This is not just who can be entertaining. It's not a reality show. And I made this argument that, look, ultimately, you look at the history of the American presidency, particularly in the 20th century, you'd probably say the value of judgment and management seem like, the two skills that matter most. Yeah, a fighter. Well, look, anybody can be a fighter. Mike Tyson is a fighter, right? But is Avenatti a fighter? Sure. I'm sure he is a really impassioned advocate for his clients. And Lord knows he knows how to get a lot of publicity. But that's not really, when you're president of the United States, you already have the publicity. That kind of comes with the job. That's not really the issue there. The issue is, can you get Congress to come to an agreement? Can you persuade people to come around to the right point of view? How can you handle foreign leaders? You're going to have to meet with a lot of ones that you like and are friendly to us. And you're going to have to meet with foreign leaders who we don't like and who are not friendly with us. Can you build coalitions, right? Are you cool-headed in a crisis? I mean, you just go down the list. Being a fighter is actually fairly low on the list of qualities we want to see in a president of the United States. So, again, this isn't reality show. The whole point of I'm perfectly fine with boring presidents. I don't think governing is supposed to be entertaining. I don't think governing is supposed to be a show in which we're always tuning in to see what happens next. This stuff is actually too important. You actually have to, when he says he has to do his homework, I'm glad to see him at least using that phrase, because in some ways, governing should be homework. It's not about putting on a show and a song and dance. But anyway, and then, of course, which raises the question, is Richard Gere qualified to be a U.S. congressman? I mean, yes, probably he meets the literal constitutional requirements. I hope he lives in the district. Some folks who are running for office this year don't even meet that criteria. I know he's been very impassioned on the issue of Tibet. That's probably not the number one issue before Congress, but hey, okay, it's good to see he's got at least some interest in foreign affairs. But in a better world, Richard Gere, having some interest in running for Congress, you'd say, okay, great, welcome. And you'd go in and he'd be in there in a debate with, the state legislator and the mayor and all the other folks who'd want to do this. And he'd be judged on the exact same criteria. And the question would be, who can do the best job of representing this district and being our voice in the House of Representatives? I don't think it's going to be that, because once you're a celebrity, once you're Richard Gere, the guy who's been in Hollywood movies for a lot of years, all of a sudden the story, the coverage, the narrative of the race is about, hey, look at this Hollywood star doing it. Look, it's up to the people in this district who they want to represent, and I hope they make the best choice possible. But look, I would want somebody with deep ties to the community. I would want somebody who actually knew what really mattered here, whether it's a factory shutting down or, whether it's a local river that needs to be cleaned up or what local property taxes rates are and whether that's putting pressure on people, crime rates. How well do you know that community? If Richard Gere really is the guy who knows these people and these people feel like he's the best choice, God bless him. But my sneaking suspicion is you shouldn't elect somebody because they're famous and you really liked, was Red Corner the movie he made about Chinese oppression?
I believe so.
Or Pretty Woman or anything like that. Look, we always have seen actors and celebrities jumping into politics, but again, it's not meant to be entertainment, and that is the thread that ties Avenatti and Richard Gere as we head into the weekend.
Jim, I left out the very first line in this story from the New York Post. It says, this could be his greatest role ever. How hard would that be to be his greatest role?
He did was it First Knight? There was some sort of medieval, he played a knight, and I was like, oh, great, Richard Gere, Mr., soft, sensitive guy. He was actually fairly good in that. So I'm not the usual, Richard Gere. Now, Lord knows I've seen a bunch of chick flicks that I didn't really want to watch because of, Mrs. Geraghty. Mm-hmm. And they've had a bunch of Richard Gere in them. But I'll try not to hold that against him, evaluating him as a candidate.
It's part of the marriage contract, Jim. A runaway bride, Pretty Woman. You can't really avoid him, but I wouldn't put him up. I wouldn't put him up on the Mount Rushmore of anything. So, good luck, voters in the 18th district. Jim, you're off for the next week. Have a wonderful time, and we'll talk to you in a little over a week.
Seeing you in a week, Greg. My apologies for everyone if I've been mentally already on vacation the latter half of this week.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. And please tune in on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch. Have a great weekend, everyone.